Okay, this is kind of a hodgepodge of makeup. So we've got some stuff from Beauty Treats, which is a brand that I've typically found either on Amazon or in stores like Five Below. I've got a couple Korean brands here, and then I've also got something from the UK, which is Sleek Makeup. Let's start here. So this is a Beauty Treats palette. This was, I think, $3 at Five Below, and it is a dupe for the Visart palette. I will say this has that it has that cheap makeup smell. So you know how sometimes you open up makeup palettes and it's got a very, like, I don't know how to describe it, mild chemically plasticky smell to it. Like, it just smells like cheap makeup. I don't know how else to describe it. This just smells like cheap makeup, but for some reason it totally performs. And I've seen several people test this next to the Visart palette that's a ton of money, and they have gotten the same pigmentation, the same lasting power, and they swear up and down it's the same as the Visart palette. They were just shocked at it. So I have definitely used this palette before. These shadows feel super creamy to the touch, but I will say that they need building up. So if you can see that there, that was just a finger swatch. They definitely aren't the most pigmented shadows ever, but I do find that you can pick them up pretty easily with a brush, and they do go on much better with a blending brush than they do with your finger. That's the case with a lot of mattes sometimes. So I do think I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to set it to the side though, because as I'm sitting here saying I'm going to keep this one, I do want to kind of do a second pass through my palettes, because I feel like I'm keeping a lot of palettes, and I want to go through and kind of do a second pass and look at colors and matte palettes and just make sure that I'm not keeping a ton of palettes that are super similar. These are two Beauty Treats palettes that I think I bought a little duo set of out on Amazon. I thought that the colors in these were both pretty interesting. I liked the fact that you had the Roses palette had some really interesting tones to it. Once again, it's a color combo that you don't see in a lot of drugstore makeup, in my opinion. So these colors are pigmented, but they require a little bit of babying because they're a thinner, more crumbly shadow. I really feel like these shimmer shades work best either with your finger like I just did, or over a sticky base, or wet with Fix Plus to really perform well, because I think it's a thinner formula. And in order to get that real high shine like you're seeing kind of on my wrist right now, you definitely need that. They don't work well with a brush over a dry lid. So what I would say about these shadows in particular is that it's a thinner formula, so the shimmers really do need a tacky base to show up, or some Fix Plus in order to work. The mattes in these are just meh, like they really were just okay. So to be honest, I probably don't see myself reaching for this palette, so I do think I'm going to pass it along. The Modern Mattes palette I thought was kind of a cool color scheme. It was like grungy, wormy, purpley. I don't know. I thought it was a kind of a cool color scheme, different than a lot of other things in my collection. It's okay. Once again, it's just, I found that I could definitely get them to build up on my eye over a primer. You have to have a primer to make these work, but I found that they faded quite a bit on me. So once again, when you're buying a $2–3 eyeshadow palette, I guess we shouldn't be shocked when the pigmentation isn't there. So I also think I'm going to pass this one on. I definitely think that the lasting power pigmentation was better in this formula, in this little tiny format, than in this bigger pan. This is brand new to my collection. I just grabbed this one at Five Below, gosh, last week, the week before last. I've swatched a couple of shades and that is it, but I thought the colors looked pretty interesting. Once again, it's a very thin formula and kind of crumbly. So I really, once again, feel like you want to wet your brush to make this work, and or use some Fix Plus. I don't know, I'm a little nervous. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it almost feels like there's a glitter overlay over the top, because it's like wiping off some of the sparkle that was kind of in these shades. Guys, I just have eyeshadow palettes I like better than this. This was a chance. It was like $2, so I gave it a shot because I thought, well, if it doesn't work, it's $2. I can already tell I'm not going to love this one, so I'm going to pass it on. This is a Sleek eyeshadow palette. This is their Eye Divine in Oh So Special. The formula on these Sleek palettes desperately reminds me of the Makeup Revolution eyeshadows in the sense that the mattes are not bad, but the shimmers really need a lot of help. But the shimmer shades have that really stiff, sort of oily feel to them, and then they don't translate very well on the eyes. Even with your finger, I'm having to press quite a bit to get that pigment to transfer off my finger onto my wrist. So I just found that working with these, even with a wet brush, was just really, really difficult. And it's just not a color scheme. It's like super exciting to me. So I'm going to pass this one on. These are two eyeshadow palettes that I picked up in Seoul. So this is the Clio Pro Layering Eye Palette. This is number 2, Handcraft. This one I love. So one thing you have to kind of know and recognize about Korean beauty eyeshadows is that they're not huge fans of that really foiled eye the way that we are. I think a lot of it has to do with their eye shape. Those really foiled eyeshadows tend to crease on them, or have a tendency to crease on them. So they tend to reach for satins and mattes more. So this palette is satins and mattes only. There's not anything really high shine shimmer in here, but I really like this palette. Like, I like the tones in it. I think the colors are really interesting. I love that they included a really rich brick red and this really deep smoky purple color. The pigmentation is absolutely there. I mean, the rust red color is amazing. I mean, the intensity of that color is just incredible. The shimmers, like I said, they're satins. They're not anything to write home about, but they definitely work well inside of this palette. I've made some really pretty, interesting looks with this, and the colors are just super easy to blend, super easy to build up. I don't have anything else from a color combo perspective like this in my collection, so I'm definitely hanging on to this, not only for sentimental reasons of having picked this up in Korea, but just, I don't know, I like the colors, so hang on to this. This is a Korean brand called Wake Make. They are really known for their brow products and their eyeliners. I picked up their 16 color Bomb Eyes shadow palette. This is shade 01. It probably has a name I can't read here in Korean. It's an interesting palette. I got it because, once again, the color scheme was interesting to me, and it looked like it might have some more foiled shades, which is not something I see all the time over there. It has this little slide over thing, and I'm not entirely sure why they did this other than to keep these shades away from that. All of these are powder. It's not that these are cream. If these had been cream eyeshadows, I would have thought this was the most clever design of life, because it would have kept them protected. I mean, I guess it kind of keeps the lighter shades protected from the darker shades, kind of, sort of. I don't know. I like this palette as well. I will admit, of the two of them, I think I like the Clio one a little bit better. I think the quality is still really nice with this, though. This is something you can get in their drugstores. I mean, come on, who are we arguing here? Like, pigmentation on that is stunning, right? This is definitely something you get in, like I said, their drugstores. Olive Young is a huge kind of like Walgreens in Seoul. And it's got the satin shades like you expect to see in a lot of eyeshadow palettes from them. But then it had this really interesting sort of foiled peachy shade that has a lot of shimmer and a lot of almost microfine glimmer in it. It really looks wet on your eye when you use it. I thought that was really pretty. Okay, so now we come to the last section of what I would consider to be drugstore eyeshadow palettes. These are all ones that I have gotten off of the Shop Hush website. Specifically, I got them off of the app. The great thing about their app is that shipping is always free, so you can buy a $10 palette. It'll get shipped to you for free. They're super easy to work with. Their shipping is fantastic. Everything has come packaged very nicely, so I never worry about anything breaking. And the quality of the palettes that I have gotten from these two brands in particular are fantastic. So let's start with this one. This is the Face Candy palette. This is the Sahara palette. This is the same brand that did the Vice palette that we talked about a little while ago, this sort of purpley palette that was so lovely. They have also done the Sahara palette, and this one, to the best of my knowledge, isn't duping any other palette. These are all definitely dupe palettes, but this one I just recently got. I think it's beautiful. I sent it to my sister as well because I thought these were colors that would really inspire her. The packaging is lovely, first of all. I mean, this feels like a high-end eyeshadow palette. This feels every bit as nice as so many other eyeshadow palettes that I have from Sephora and Ulta. It's got a nice magnetic closure. It has a really big mirror up in the top here. You've got these sort of mustardy, orangey matte colors that are super pigmented, super creamy. This is a palette that I literally just got a few weeks ago though, and I have not played with this on my eyes. So this is me just giving you some first impressions based off of swatches. So you know how that can go. Sometimes you can definitely end up with some funky eyeshadows that look great when swatched with your hand but not applied. That duochrome sort of pinky purpley blue shift is stunning. That's an absolutely beautiful shade. I don't know, it was just a lot of palettes out on the Shop Hush website are duping things. This face candy brand just seems to be bringing some interesting colors to the market on its own. And I thought, you know what? I don't have anything else with that kind of color scheme in it. The mustard is amazing. So yeah, I want to play around with this one. So hanging on to it, putting it in the to try pile. So one thing I want to say about these 6 palettes, all 6 of these palettes are duping higher end brand palettes. They are. And I know some people have some real problem with that and other people don't. I do want to share kind of my 2 cents on those. I think there's a difference between a dupe palette and a forgery. So in my mind, a forgery is when a unknown brand tries to pass off a palette that it acts and looks exactly like the Huda Beauty Desert Dusk palette, for example. So they use their logo, they try and duplicate the packaging, they put their brand information on the back in terms of like Huda's brand website. I mean, they really try and make it look like Huda's palette, but it's actually a fake. That's a forgery. I don't buy any of those, and I would not recommend you buy any of those because there's absolutely nothing to protect you as a consumer from them having done some really shady things with that palette. On the flip side, you have a brand here like Bad Habit who looks at a palette like Desert Dusk from Huda Beauty and says, you know what? Not everyone can afford Desert Dusk. We can make a high quality palette. We're going to call it the Athena palette. We are going to design our own pretty packaging here. We're going to put our name on the back of it. We're going to put our expiration date. We're going to put our customer service numbers attached to this product because we're going to stand behind it as a quality palette. And then we are going to take the Desert Dusk colors and we're going to put them together in a slightly different order and we're going to launch it. So I think there's a difference between a dupe palette and a forgery. I would stay away from forgeries. I don't personally have any issues with dupe palettes because I think it opens up really fun eyeshadow color combos to the world, and I think a company like Bad Habit does it incredibly well. That was a tangent and a half. Now let's get into these palettes. So Bad Habit Retro Love, I have done a full review on. This is a dupe for the Subculture palette. To me, this is another great example of why dupe palettes are important because I had no desire to pick up the Subculture palette because I didn't think I would like the formula. So I knew I wouldn't like the formula of Subculture based on the reviews, based on my own swatches in the stores. It was too pigmented, too powdery, didn't appeal to how I like to apply eyeshadows. So when Bad Habit put this palette out, I was super excited because this is what I would consider to be more of a traditional eyeshadow palette, nicely pigmented. I did a full review on this palette and comparing it against this Makeup Revolution Iconic Division palette. If you would like to see my review and thoughts on these 2 palettes, I will link it down below, but definitely I'm going to hang on to this Bad Habit Retro Love palette. I did really enjoy it. This is the Bad Habit Aura palette. This is duping the limited edition palette from Anastasia. This is the Prism palette dupe. Prism palette was one of those ones that I swatched in stores and I thought was interesting, but I just couldn't bring myself to pay the money for a palette that I thought I might like to play around with here or there, but that I wasn't sure was going to be this total love of my life. Anastasia palettes can be a little pricey, so I don't know. It didn't move me enough to want to pick it up, but I did think some of the colors in here were really, really interesting. This purple shade looked really pretty in the Anastasia palette, and I thought, gosh, I don't have a bright limey chartreuse color like this. So when I saw Bad Habit had done a palette, I thought, you know what, the quality might not be quite as perfect as the palette from Anastasia, but I'm willing to take maybe a slight downgrade in that in order to have some of these sort of fun, smoky shades. They're really interesting colors. The biggest complaint I heard about this palette from people that reviewed it was that it was really hard to kind of put looks together using just this palette, and I totally see that. So this is one where I have definitely played around and made a few looks. The formulas, I will say, between the Retro Love and this one are very similar. Good quality, great pigmentation. I mean, to me, this just proves that there's a way to make drugstore palettes and very affordable palettes incredibly pigmented and perform well. So I really have no patience anymore for the drugstore not looking and feeling just as high-end as my Sephora palettes, because this proves to me that you can absolutely do it and charge me $10 for it. All right, let's talk about these two. So this is the Aphrodite and Athena palette. These are duping Huda Beauty palettes. This is duping the Huda Beauty Rose Gold palette, and then this is duping the Desert Dusk palette. The Rose Gold palette was one that really just never totally appealed to me because the shimmer shades that she had in there were really crumbly and weird to the touch, and I never really enjoyed the touch or the feel of them, so I had kind of passed on this palette. So once again, similar to the Retro Love palette when it duped the Anastasia palette, I kind of thought to myself, okay, I know Bad Habit can do some really nice foily eyeshadows, so maybe I will like the formula of these shimmer shades more, and it'll warrant me having this palette. Now, that being said, I look at this palette and I'm still not super inspired. I don't know what it is about this color combo that doesn't like make me super gaga. I mean, I like the fact that it's got taupey shades in here, and then you've got some warmer transition shades. I mean, the pink is really interesting, and listen, super vibrant. You can't knock Bad Habit for eyeshadow quality. These are really crumbly, but they do perform and look incredibly foiled on the lid. At the end of the day, I'm just not going crazy for this color scheme. I think I may have some friends who would want to try this out, so I think I'm gonna actually pass this one along. So this is the Athena palette, is duping the Desert Dusk palette. The Desert Dusk palette was one that I had favorited and then unfavorited and then favorited, and at the end of the day, when this one came out, I thought to myself, you know what, you were a little wishy-washy on whether or not you wanted to get this palette from Huda. Let's just get the more affordable version and call it a day. So I will admit I have not played around with this a ton. In fact, I think I've only used this twice. But I really like some of the tones in here. I liked the purpley shades. I liked the pigmentation. I will admit I have not used every single shade in here, so really this should probably go into my to try pile. But I thought that the purples in here were really, really pretty and a lot of fun. For some reason, she did a pressed glitter in here, which I don't understand why Huda did that. They went and copied it in here, and it is still a crumbly sort of pressed glitter, so you better have some glitter base down before you tap that on. I mean, I guess it's a pretty glitter. It's not what I'm looking for in eyeshadow palettes personally. The mattes are pretty. They do kick up a little bit of powder, but they are super pigmented, so I would equate them kind of to like an Anastasia or Lorac kind of shadow in terms of kick up when you use them. So I do need to play around with this a bit more. Having swatched the colors, I think there's some very pretty looks in here. But ultimately, I think I'm going to be glad that I got the Athena version versus the Desert Dusk palette, just having played around with this a few times. But I am going to keep this one. All right, so these two are duping the Natasha Denona Solstice and Lila palette, or Lila. I'm not sure which one I ever heard was correct. So this is duping the Sunset palette, and this is duping the Lila palette. These were $129 palettes from Natasha Denona, and I knew that even though I have enjoyed the few Natasha Denona eyeshadows I have purchased, that I would never be forking over the $129 that she wants for her eyeshadow palettes. So I can get that inspiration without that $129 price tag. I think these retail for either $12 or $15 on the Shop Hush website. So once again, this is the Solstice palette. This was duping the Natasha Denona Sunset palette. This is very similar in some respects to the ColourPop Yes Please palette. They're very similar undertones, to be honest. These shimmers in here are really pretty, super foiled. Really liked the undertones in here. I have played with this quite a few times. I really did enjoy it. So hanging on to this one, I think it's a really good fit if you are looking to dupe that palette from Natasha Denona. The Lila palette was the closest I had ever gotten to buying a Natasha Denona palette because I just thought it was such a cool palette. So I was so relieved when I saw this pop up because I thought, yes, I can get these colors without, you know, giving myself the heartburn that a $129 palette would give me, and I knew that. So let's swatch a few here. I have played with this several times. I will admit I need to spend more time with it, but I will say the shimmer shades continue to be super creamy. The They work well with your finger. They work well with a brush. They do get more foiled when you use some sort of like Fix Plus medium for sure, but you definitely don't have to in order to make them work. I just thought some of the cooler tones in here were really nice and not something that I had in a lot of palettes. Once again, to me, this was an inspiring palette because it just gave me different color scheme than I'm used to seeing in a lot of eyeshadow palettes. Totally up my alley, totally different than I think anything else on the marketplace. So super fun palette, definitely keeping this. Hi guys, so before I get into totals, I did want to kind of show you 4 palettes that I have changed my mind about. As I went through and reorganized my drawer, I realized that I probably had duplicates when I really looked at these palettes and that there were more reasons for me to declutter them than to keep them. So there are ones that I've changed my mind about. So I wanted to show you those 4 real fast. The first is the Makeup Revolution palette, Neutrals versus Neutrals. This is one that I was keeping because I really liked the peachy tones in it. And I still do, and I still think this is a decent drugstore palette. I definitely think there are better out there now. And the primary reason I was keeping this was for the peachy shades, and I since feel like I have a lot more peachy eyeshadows than I realized, having now gone through my entire collection. So this is one that I feel pretty okay getting rid of. Once again, the shimmers were never my favorite. I was really keeping this for peachy tones. So that one is going to get passed along. I'm also going to pass along this All About Nude Shadow palette from Essence. I guess what I realized is that I had tons of matte neutral shades, lots of neutral matte palettes, and I just didn't feel like, even though the quality of this was pretty, that I was going to be reaching for it over those other ones. So I'm going to pass this one on. And then I'm also going to pass on these 2 matte eyeshadow palettes. Although this is a dupe and I do think it's good quality, I just can't get over the smell of this. And I feel like with both of these are both all matte palettes, and I feel like both the Hard Candy and this Beauty Treats palette, almost all of these shades are replicated in my e.l.f. Mad for Matte eyeshadow palettes, and I really like those better. They're sleeker, they're more compact than this Hard Candy one. The pigmentation's there. I will probably miss these 2 lighter shades, but I will get over it. So I'm going to go ahead and add these 4 to my declutter. Okay, so for totals here, I am still testing 11 palettes. So I've set those to the side and not counted them as part of this declutter, either keep or donate. So of those 11 palettes are off to the side for testing. But of the palettes that I had left, I am keeping 42, and I've made the decision to donate 35, which is a lot more than I thought I was going to be getting rid of. So I'm actually getting rid of 45% of my collection. But it's interesting, now that I have this drawer set up, and I'm going to show you some footage of what that looks like, I really feel like things are easy to grab. I know what these palettes are. I know that I like and love all of them. I've gotten rid of some of the clutter from things that I had tested and just kept, even though I didn't necessarily love. So I'm feeling really good about the declutter in general, and then also how the drawers are looking at this point. Thank you guys so much for watching through this incredibly long drugstore declutter series. I really love you guys. Thank you so much for your comments down below and for your amazing support of my channel. I hope you guys are having an absolutely amazing day, and I look forward to sharing with you guys my next declutter.